Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special side event on emerging men as allies in women, peace, and security. It's being held in conjunction with the Security Council's recent open debate on WPS. I'm Elan Verveer, and I direct the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. I want to thank the Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations for sponsoring and hosting this event, and the Permanent Mission of the United States to the UN for co-sponsoring, along with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and our institute at Georgetown. More than 2 decades ago, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. The resolution was an historic recognition of women's unique experiences of conflict and the acknowledgement that gender equality is an integral part of international peace and security. Indeed, acknowledging that women's agency is absolutely critical to peace and security. The transformative potential of the WPS agenda, sadly, has not been fully realized. In fact, we have a lot of hard work ahead of us. Women remain severely underrepresented in peace processes. Violence disproportionately affects them, and conflict-related sexual violence continues with impunity. Several factors contribute to this lack of progress, including the failure to engage with men and masculinities, which brings us all together today to remedy the situation. The research presented contributes to bridging the gap between current WPS practice that focuses mostly on women and the growing body of research that explores how efforts to improve the status of women can indeed be strengthened by engaging with men and masculinities. So to kick us off for this dialogue that we're going to have together, I'm going to turn to Her Excellency Yoko Kamikawa. She is the Foreign Minister of Japan, who is joining us by video. The Foreign Minister has been an absolute leader on WPS in Japan and by example globally. The Foreign Minister.
Distinguished colleagues and friends, I would like to congratulate the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for organizing the symposium on engaging men as allies in women, peace and security, co-hosted by the Permanent Mission of Japan and the United States Mission to the UN. I also pay tribute to Ambassador Elan Verveer, the host and moderator of today's symposium. Ambassador Verveer was the one who told me the importance of WPS, which has rapidly become mainstreamed in the international community. She inspired me to focus my efforts on promoting the implementation of the WPS agenda. I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude and respect to the ambassador for her tireless efforts in promoting the global mainstreaming of the WPS agenda. I have been working hard on the promotion of the WPS agenda even before I became foreign minister. I established a parliamentary league on WPS in Japan last year. The league positioned the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security as the international collaboration partners and have been actively working together. Last month, I was appointed as the first female foreign minister in about 20 years. Since then, I have attended the United Nations High-Level Week and visited Southeast Asian countries. and I appealed to the importance of WPS in response to both natural and man-made disasters, and have received positive feedback from all those I have met. The theme of today's symposium is how to engage men to advance the WPS agenda. Since the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, we have witnessed various achievements such as greater participation of women in peace processes and peace building, the creation of various international frameworks for promoting this agenda, and a global trend of gender mainstreaming in security policies. It is clear that support for such efforts is expanding. At the same time, new ideas are needed to elevate this important initiative to the next level. And adding men's perspectives on this issue is very critical. For example, our third National Action Plan specifically includes references to the need for men's engagement and identified strengthening of advocacy to men as a key action to take. It is also important to incorporate youth perspectives for further diversity. Another unique feature of Japan's action plan is that it includes a commitment to increase women's leadership role in decision-making in the area of disaster risk reduction stemming from natural disasters. Japan has extensive experience in fighting natural disasters. We have struggled to promote women's leadership and gender equality, including the issue of low numbers of female political leaders, while traditional notions of gender divisions of labor stream still remain. And because of that, I believe Japan can play a more proactive role in addressing specific challenges other countries face and work together on these areas. With these ideas in mind, I would like to further promote the WPS agenda as Foreign Minister with the determination to create a more peaceful world together by sharing and learning from each other among all countries, including the Indo-Pacific region and the Global South, and especially with ASEAN, as this year marks the 50th anniversary year of friendship with Japan. I believe that today's symposium will serve as a model for governments and civil society organizations in various countries to work hand in hand to promote the WPS agenda around the world. I wish you a successful symposium. Thank you very much.
We thank the Foreign Minister greatly for her leadership. I'm going to turn now to His Excellency Kimohiro Ishikane, the permanent representative of Japan to the United Nations. Mr. Ambassador, thank you immensely for your leadership and bringing us together to this day here. We're very grateful to you.
Well, thank you. Distinguished guests, at the outset, I would like to extend my thanks to the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security and Ambassador Babier and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for organizing this event and the United States Mission for co-hosting. I would also like to thank all the participants who are present today. Japan is pleased to co-host this event on engaging men as allies in women, peace, and security. Although 2 out of the 10 UN Security Council resolutions related to WPS acknowledge the importance of involving men and boys in WPS initiatives, the majority of WPS efforts do not actively engage with men and boys. On the national level, the engagement of men and boys has always been a component of Japan's national action plan on WPS. Based on the plans, we have supported interventions targeting men as active agents in conflict and post-conflict settings. Before the briefing on the report, I do not want to disclose too much on the content, but I would like to highlight a few of the key findings that I found interesting with potential policy implications. First, the majority of men in the study do not associate violence with masculinity and express a desire for different expectations of masculinity. Additionally, women, particularly mothers and wives, play a significant part in shaping expectations of masculinity. And these findings clearly show the importance of engaging both genders in the implementation of the WPS agenda. After concluding the annual Security Council open debate on WPS last week, along with a number of related events and discussions throughout this month, I trust all of you have developed ideas and aspirations for the way forward. I hope that today's event will provide further opportunity to understand the advantages of integrating a perspective of masculinities into a WPS agenda, and that it will result in tangible and positive impacts on the work of each one of you. I look forward to hearing your feedback, especially from the distinguished representatives from Indonesia and the Philippines who have joined us today. I thank you.
Japan is on the Security Council, and I know, Mr. Ambassador, you're kept very, very busy these days with all the challenges in our world. So thank you again for being with us and playing such a leadership role. Our next speaker is Maho Kamikawa. She's the Director and Senior Program Officer for the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the Director of the Peacebuilding Program, and as such, she has been significantly engaged in the 3 conflict areas in Southeast Asia where the field survey on which this report was based and was conducted. So it's really great to hear from you, Maho, and especially to help us understand where this took place and how it came about.
Thank you. Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Yoko Kamikawa, Honorable Representative of the United States to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, Honorable Permanent Representative of Japan to the United Nations, Ambassador Kimihiro Ishikane, Honorable Ambassador Meran Berbia, Executive Director, Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, Excellency, distinguished guests and delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to speak to you at this launch of a new report by Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security on the theme of growing importance, understanding men and masculinities for WPS agenda. First of all, representing the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to our co-sponsors, Missions of the United States to the United Nations, Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations, and Georgetown Institute for WPS for all their support to realize this event. Also, we would like to thank our panelists, most experienced and most suited for today's event, Dr. Gary Barker, working with men, promoting gender equality in many parts of the world, and Ms. Samsidar, respected Achenese activist, to fly so many hours to share her invaluable experiences of working for women and peace since from the conflict time in Aceh in Indonesia. And I would like to congratulate successful, excellent research team led by Dr. Robert Nagel for their groundbreaking work. bringing the importance of masculinity lens into WPS discussions. Sasakawa Peace Foundation is a private foundation from Japan promoting international cooperation. And we started our work of peace building, particularly in a conflict area called Pattani in southern Thailand back in 2010. And throughout the years, we tried our best to include women's empowerment in every activities or program, however, consistently met resistance from male local partners. Therefore, we realized if we want to enhance women's law, we need to understand the perceptions of male stakeholders and gain their trust and make them understand the merit of women's empowerment. And women's empowerment alone will not lead us to systemic transformation on the ground. So therefore, the question we have been struggling is how international interventions for peace and gender could support gender transformation from within, avoiding unnecessary backlash from local stakeholders. Since we are working with traditional Malay Muslim society where women and men live under clear gender division of labor, and sometimes in these communities, the term gender alone may invite a suspicion. So paper for today's discussion, Beyond Engaging Men, Masculinity, Nonviolence, and Peace Building, is a result of 3 years collaborative research project with Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and 5 other regional and local partners to explore the interrelationship between gender equality, masculinity, and peace building. And we feel extremely fortunate to build partnership with GWIP, Georgetown Institute for Women in Peace and Security, a highly respected institution with rigorous academic work for promoting WPS. Since with this partnership, we were able to connect local and regional perspectives to be shared with global communities. So what has been done in this project is the GWIP team, in collaboration with Integral Knowledge Asia based in Jakarta, with the help of Conciliation Resources, has drafted a questionnaire with question of more than 70 on gender equality, peace building, experiences of violence, and perceptions on gender norms. And the expression used in this questionnaire was revised and corrected by our local partners, Mindanao State University General Santos, International Center for Aceh and Indian Ocean Studies, and Patimura University from Maluku in Indonesia, and tested with local communities and answers of 6,000 respondents from 3 post-conflict contexts, Maluku and Aceh in Indonesia, and Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines, were collected with the help of about 100 enumerators under supervision of our local partners. So the paper by GWIPS we were launching today is the first of our outputs, setting the scene with framework to incorporate masculinity perspective into WPS agenda, with several striking findings from our data, which question the conventional understanding of association between men and violence, or the significant role played by women in shaping what it means to be a man. And I'm really pleased to share with you today that we are expecting 3 more papers to come out from GWIPS, and also investigating more closely into in each conflict-affected areas, and to be added with 7 more papers to come out, compiled by regional and local partners, to be launched in the coming months in each field. So if I may, these forthcoming papers also present many interesting findings with concrete policy implications, including correlationship between frequency of men's household work and their positive view of a woman's role in peace building, or the positive impact of men's participation in peace building training with gender equality perspective, and how lingering trauma from violence during conflict times affect women and men's feeling of insecurity and their perceptions over violence. So we hope that this GWIPS paper will invite further discussions on the importance of understanding men and masculinity in promoting WPS work, and facilitate more dialogue connecting local and international stakeholders to explore the question of how we can achieve WPS agenda and gender equality, coping with global and local backlash against the agenda of gender equality by harnessing local resources and inspirations for gender transformation. So as my last remark, I would like to thank all the participants for joining these discussions. We look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maho. And you can see from what she said how intensive this process was, how it affected three conflict-affected areas in Southeast Asia, and the kind of work that went on with partners on the ground and our team at Georgetown. Speaking of which, I'm going to turn now to the chief author of the report that's being launched today, Dr. Robert Nagel. He's a resident fellow at Georgetown.
Thank you so much. It has been my privilege and sincere pleasure to work on this project for 3 years, and it is my honor to present the findings here today. Before I dive into the findings and implications, I'd like to recognize my co-authors, Josh Allen and Christine Backard, without whom this would not have been possible. Thank you both. Together with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, we had two overarching goals for this project. First, we wanted to challenge and change the idea that women are solely responsible for achieving gender equality. Second, we wanted to push beyond the assumption of men as violent and explore how working with men and masculinities could help advance the women, peace, and security agenda. Before I share some of our key findings, I wanted to underscore why it is so important. We've had the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 for over 20 years. And while we've seen some progress in making gains for women's rights around the world, the transformative potential of the agenda has not been fully realized. There are several reasons for this, including a lack of funding and political will from member states. We believe that the failure to engage with men and masculinities is another important reason for why we have not made enough progress. With that said, I'm going to share 4 key findings and highlight potential policy implications from our research. Given our limited time together, this will be a brief overview. So I encourage you all to read the full report for all the nuance and details. As has been mentioned, these findings are based on over 6,000 surveys of men and women in 3 conflict-affected contexts: Aceh and Maluku in Indonesia, and from the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, henceforth the BARM, in the Philippines. We had the privilege of working with exceptional local partners, including Mindanao State University, Intercol, ICAOS, Pasca Aceh, and Patimura University. Their invaluable work in the field made this project possible, and I want to underline our gratitude for them in this collaborative international research project. One aspect we were particularly interested in was the relationship between masculinity and violence. So we asked men in our survey, what qualities are important for being a good man? And we found that violence does not appear as a core quality of men's understanding of or investment in masculinity. While men are often assumed to be inherently violent, our survey finds across all 3 cases that it is the least important quality of being a man. What men did identify as important was being married, being a good father, being religious, and being an economic provider. So what does this finding mean for the policy community? First, it means that in our policy and program design, we cannot assume that all men are violent. In the same way that we're pushing beyond the narrative of women as victims, we must look beyond the narrative of men and violence when creating programs. Second, it presents an opportunity, particularly for peace-building programs, to leverage men's self-proclaimed preference for nonviolence to drive their participation in peace-building initiatives. Now, we can't talk about masculinity without talking about patriarchy. We asked our respondents, both men and women, questions about their respective roles in the home, in public spaces, and the divisions of power. We found that across all three cases, men and women share similar attitudes towards violence and patriarchy. That is to say, for questions where men did endorse the use of violence, which was very rare, so did women. Equally, for questions about leadership, women and men's responses were similar. Now, I want to be extremely clear that women's support for some patriarchal values should not be interpreted as blanket support for patriarchy in general. In many contexts, conflict and non-conflict, there are often no viable alternatives for women to seek physical and economic security other than through men. This concept is known as the patriarchal bargain, and essentially means patriarchy creates constraints and incentives that force both men and women to play by the rules of its game. This can inform policy and practice in two key ways. First, we cannot assume that gender is the sole or primary characteristic that determines support for violence and patriarchy. When we design programs to tackle violence and gender inequality, we must be careful not to make generalizations about men's or women's beliefs about these issues. Second, and more specifically, when designing programs that are meant to dismantle discriminatory gender norms, it is necessary to consider and address the incentives for women to uphold them. That is to say, we must not only create opportunities, but also understand the barriers, material, social, and cultural, that might prevent women from taking advantage of these newly created opportunities. Our survey also asked men, who teaches you to be a man? We found that women, particularly in their roles as mothers and wives, play an important part in shaping expectations of masculinity. This is significant because it shows us not only that women are key actors in shaping masculine norms, but also that the socialization of men is a lifelong process. It doesn't stop when you turn 18. Meaning, it is never too late to engage with men on gender norms and masculinities. Based on this finding, we also identified two key policy implications. First, gender transformative and violence prevention programs must work with both men and women, because wives and mothers in particular can be key allies in programs seeking to change men's beliefs and behaviors. Second, it suggests that particularly in Aceh, Maluku, and the Barm, gender transformative interventions should focus not only on community, peer-to-peer interactions, but also on the family as a site for potential change. The fourth finding I'd like to highlight is the result we received when we asked men about the future. While the majority of men reported that they are able to live up to current expectations of masculinity, a majority also expressed a desire for different expectations of masculinity for future generations. This indicates an important opportunity for transformation. Acknowledging men's desire for something different is crucial for pushing policy forward and points us in the direction of participatory programming. First, we suggest that programs engage men from local contexts to identify the roles, responsibilities, and expectations that they wish to see changed, and explore together with them how these may support gender equality and sustainable peace. Such participatory programs should also engage women in conversations about masculinity, in recognition not only of their roles in shaping the behaviors and beliefs of men, but also to establish what changes they might wish to see for men, for their sons, for their husbands, brothers, and fathers. What I have presented is just a snapshot of our research, but we hope that you will look to the report for additional insights and analysis. Our partners in Indonesia and the Philippines will also publish additional research, which includes qualitative data that will further contextualize and situate our findings within the respective local contexts. Our partners will bring much needed additional depth and insights to the dynamics driving the survey results. If there's one thing that I hope you take away from today and this research, it's that it is not enough to empower individual women or change individual men. It is necessary to contend with masculinities and patriarchy as a system of power so we may achieve gender equality. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nagel, for giving us a snapshot. And as he said, you all have the report, so hopefully you'll engage with it a bit more deeply. But to do that right now, we're going to turn to two experts who are joining us to help us understand more broadly the implications of all of this. The first is Ms. Samsidar from Aceh, Indonesia. She is chair of the Board of Trustees of the Indonesian Justice and Peace Foundation, where she's also a researcher. She has 20 years of expertise in a variety of activist roles, professional settings related to issues like justice, gender equality, human rights, and all of these fundamental principles that matter so greatly. And in fact, her work back in Aceh was a precursor in many ways for 1325 and the resolution that was adopted by the Security Council. Also joining the panel is Dr. Gary Barker, president and founder of Equimundo. He is a leading global voice on engaging men and boys to advance gender equality and positive masculinities. I'm going to ask both of them a few questions, but I'm going to start with Ms. Samsidar and ask you to use your earpieces here unless you're proficient in Indonesian. If you're not, please turn to this. And for those who don't have access because you're sitting against the wall, maybe you can find a place where there are some of these ear sets. So, Ms. Samsidar, first of all, how can we thank you for making the trip that you made at such an extraordinary distance? She was describing last night how many airplanes she took to get from Aceh to New York. It was a very arduous journey, and so we're particularly grateful to have her with us. But let me ask, based on your experience in Aceh, how do these findings reflect the Indonesian context? Because we want to understand how it applies. And you heard Dr. Nagel talk about women and men's attitudes to patriarchy and gender roles, and perhaps you can say a little bit more digging into that. And then because we're here, because we want to see progress on women, peace, and security, for peace and security in the world, maybe you could give us some thoughts that you have of ways to bolster women, peace, and security in Indonesia. So just a few easy questions to start.
Thank you so much for Her Excellency Mr. Melanie Vervey. Thank you so much for all the participants that has come today. There are 4 pillars approach developed by the Women, Peace, and Security Global about lens of masculinity, focusing on participation, protection, prevention, and relief recovery as something very highly effective and could be as an analysis of the peace processes experiences, and which already used in Georgetown Institute in this analysis, Alliance lens of masculinity. My experience in Aceh, I am the initiator of and also steering committee members of the Aceh Women's Congress, which was held in February 2000. There are 500 Acehese women attended. And outside Aceh, that was also came together, memberikan recommendation that we give was predating the 1325 resolution, which are how armed conflict in Aceh, that was already 30 years, happened, where could be a resolution by the dialogues and negotiation process, by incorporating women. And we also give this recommendation to the Indonesian government, local government in Aceh, and also ministers, and also Indonesian president at that time, which is President Abdul Rahman Wahid. Unfortunately, this recommendation did not become the form of the basis of the Indonesian government. And we're having dialogue with the Indonesian government, with the Free Movement, Aceh movement. There are no women involved. In the grassroots, women in Aceh do a lot of negotiation and dialogues with TNI, which is Indonesian National Army, and Free Aceh movement. For example, we facilitate dialogue with battalion, which is the commander in the Central Aceh, to talk with children and women in a village that was traumatized because their village was burned and there's a lot of conflict and they see a lot of corpse. And we see how they dialogue with Free Aceh movement commander. They were doing a lot of violence towards teacher, alternative teacher, and also education alternative are stopped. We're doing education alternatives because for 3 years in the village, schools have to stop. And we dialogue with the authority and with the masculinity of a commandant of the National Battalion Commander. Violence in villages has stopped. This is a very good experience and is done by a lot of women. But unfortunately, in a lot of process, in Aceh Peace Movement in Indonesia, which is called inclusive dialogue, there's no perspective from women. What is the consequence? When we are using 4 pillars from the WPS, the Helsinki Peace MOU, which are like 71 pieces, only includes 1 about society that related about conflict-affected community and human rights issues. And only a few about human rights. Afterwards, the reconstruction after the sign of the MOU, they also don't include the participatory of women. Therefore, the urgent matter about traumatization that got violence and also mental health and trauma and also their experience between men and women that get sexual violence is not covered in this MOU until today. Of course, things like this, it would be better if there's a broader perspective from women and there's a participatory of women, if there's a direct participation. Because a woman who has the experience, because there's no women in the process of this conflict resolution and peace building, we can say that the free movement Aceh and Indonesian governments are using masculinity lens and very only little recommendations for the betterment of the society. Even then, masculinity should be pushed. Sorry. The absence of masculinity also helps us think about the factors that drive men to commit violence against women after the conflict. These factors also push violence terhadap women during the conflicts, even after the conflict area. Also, why is their feeling of uncomfortable and insecurity? Because of men do not commit fully to support women as a normative gender norms between men and women. Next. We hope that these 4 pillars that is clubbed by WPS using a masculinity lens can be used with an intersectionality and in between the pillars because they are very related. So in the future, we need to make sure that the participatory of women and the perspective of locals can be pushed to the government, the central government, which is bottom up instead of top down. What we've been doing, the dialogues are very exclusive, which only putting 2 perspectives which are in armed conflict and also the masculinity lens, only the parties that have conflicted. Her Excellency of the Miss Ambassador, which also asked how these obstacles should be done. There are 2 ways. 1, affirmative action for women spaces to make sure the participatory of women and leadership women needs to be supported, and also forums inclusive where men and women can be supported. So the rejection towards masculinity can be solved. For example, with the practice of social norms, where men is the leaders in the households and is supported by women. If in this research and the data that is here, actually, it's only a social norm. But in practice, especially in the households and the community, decision making, there's a dialogue between women and men. When there's a Sharia rules and domestication of women is challenged by women in Aceh to change. So in this data, it is explained that men in Aceh, almost 60%, they don't mind if the leader in the workforce is women. So these efforts needs to be supported so the obstacles and resistance can be pushed breakthrough and to be better of the society. And for this opportunity, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Samsidar, for that picture from Aceh and how difficult this work is and continues to be, but also progress. We're going to turn now to Dr. Gary Barker. Gary, based on your and Equimundo's extensive experience working to engage men and boys, how do these findings fit with your experience? I mean, your experience is global. So do you see consistency here, or do you see non-consistency?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for including me in the conversation. And as I read the report, I was, in my head, listening to voices of men in a number of conflict settings around the world, whether men in the security sector in Ukraine, who we interviewed some years ago, Palestinian men who we interviewed together with UN Women, the same in Afghanistan, men who are in settings where there's tremendous pressure to be combatants, to be involved in armed violence of some kind. And the same findings that you found echoed in my head. The vast majority of men did not say, I aspired to be part of this conflict, that they found meaning or identity in being violent. In fact, they could list far more and spend far more time talking about the efforts they spent to want to stay out of violence. What they also said was, there's no space to go. There is no echo, there is no support for a group of men who believe in peace and gender equality. I think a failure on our part from those who believe in both of those things is to create a space where men find identity and purpose in peace and gender equality. Our slogan or kind of tagline as an organization has often been, gender equality needs men, and men need gender equality. And I think we've done a bit of a collective failure on that second part, to say, what do men have to do, what do we gain from a world that's just and equitable for women and girls, and that is nonviolent. Our research, we've done a multi-country survey called the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. About 1 in 5 of those countries is affected by conflict. The rest are representing all regions of the world. The overall conclusion is that we are moving backwards on bringing men in to believe in gender equality. We know a number of reasons why. There are organized movements in many countries that are pushing back on gender equality, in countries that are in peace and countries that aren't. We could start in this country and look to many other places where political leaders gaining traction on pushing a fundamentalist version of masculinities. We know that countries under stress and men under stress who feel a situation of precarity are often likely to resort to rigid, authoritarian, violent versions of manhood. We know how often you can find those voices online, in media, in organized political movements. Look on the other side to see how big of voices you see of men for peace and men for gender equality. We barely come above the screen at the bottom of your computer. So I think one is to say, how do we step into this conversation saying there is a silent majority of men who want peace and gender justice? Ways to think about doing that, and I think similar conclusions come out from this study. One is to step into all the things that women's rights organizations have pushed for decades. One, I would say maybe a success or the success story of this gender equality field of the last decades has been women's economic empowerment. Women having access to their own income, their own property, their own voice in the economic world as well as in social spaces are more likely to have agency in the world. What we've often forgotten in that programming and those policies is that men need to be part of them. Not letting men hold them hostage, but saying we need you to be part of this. And if we take the time to explain to men why, do a bit of reverse mansplaining, if I may use that expression, we can find that men do see their self-interest in it, particularly when we embrace, and the part that I liked of your study very much was about men as caregivers. I think that's another area where we've not had a collective imagination that men want to be, can be, and are caregivers. One of our platforms, our global platforms, is called Men Care, a campaign that we started in 2011 to engage, insist, demand that men be part of the care economy. No country in the world has achieved full economic equality for women. No country has achieved, because no country has achieved full care equality. Nowhere in the world are men doing half of the hands-on care work at home. More than that, no country even has an objective. And this distinguished body, the UN, our country states have not put an objective that we believe we can get to a moment where men and boys are doing 50% of the hands-on care work. We find, however, in programming at the community level and in policies, men resonate to that. To see themselves and to become involved as caregivers, we see a virtuous cycle that they see the benefits to themselves, they become more engaged in it, and what we're hoping to do is that they become engaged as activists for the care economy as well, acknowledging how much it is part of who we are as humans. Second point, and I think this study highlights that as well, is understanding men's traumas in conflict. No matter where we look in conflict settings, men are harmed in specific ways. We don't look at that instead of what happens to women, but alongside. We know that men are conscripted, they are injured, they are tortured, they lose livelihoods. We can make the long, horrible list that happens to women as well. We know that what happens to men generates cycles of use of violence and abuse that often reverberates in women's lives. Whatever we do in terms of trauma also needs to think about men's traumas. We've partnered in the Democratic Republic of Congo with colleagues at the Living Peace Institute in a model that looks at men's trauma, creates a group support process, together with women who have experienced sexual and gender-based violence in conflict, to work on a couple approach as well as a community-based approach that has seen a tremendous reduction in men's repeat use of violence against female partners. These approaches can work if they're funded, if they're supported, and at times if they're scaled up. I want to end on the point that I think I like this study as well for turning the voice, kind of to turn the narrative around and say, we can look at any setting in the world affected by conflict, economic inequality, and tell millions of stories of men's violence. But I think turning the question around to say, where do we see men's resistance to harmful, abusive, dominant forms of masculinities? We can also fill up millions of pages with those interviews. So I think as we take this lens into the peace field, let's look at that. What are the spaces where men and boys can resist every day, because we do, the versions of manhood that are around us? And that's sort of remembering every single day, and I think about this of working with fathers in a number of settings affected by conflict, to watch on their face as they play with their daughters and sons, to believe that 3-year-old son that he's playing with did not grow up to be violent. His destiny is not to become a combatant the way perhaps that his father was. We've got to hang on to that potential of his desire to be caring, to be connected, and to believe fully in the dignity of women and girls. Thanks very much.
So, Gary, I know you're supposed to be elsewhere right now, but I've always been attracted by your work demonstrating how men are co-beneficiaries of gender equality, how they benefit. It's not something they're being forced to do or do against their will, but once they understand that there are benefits to them, change comes. Can you say just a little bit more about that, and then we'll say...
I think we spend a lot of time speaking with men about how patriarchy harms our lives as well. Whether we look at men's death rates, men's health, men's mental health, conflict is a key one that I just brought up. And I think it is stepping in with that empathy toward men of lived experiences of how patriarchy affects our lives that men, I think, kind of adjust our own masks and then can go, oh, the person next to me, my female partner, women in the world around me experience this every day. And I think if we are able to do the kind of design spaces where men can talk about this, it doesn't take very long before the light bulb goes off of saying, wow, we're all affected by this. And then how do we engage you in the action that comes from it? I think it's very careful, or we need to be very careful as we do this, that this is not about men taking over the gender equality space. And I think, your voice, Ambassador, has been very clear about this is not about men going, hey, now it's our turn, we're going to run the gender field as well, because we've been running lots of other things in the meantime. But to say, how can men march with, not instead of? So there's a delicate dance of accountability that I think you've been very good at modeling that I think can work.
Thank you so much. And let me just ask Ms. Samsidar one more question, if I might. Are there any single terrific incentives that you know about or have experienced for men to become engaged on women, peace, and security, or on gender equality more broadly? What incentives have you seen, if any, working?
Thank you so much for Ambassador Melanie. Incentive that can be get from men in this process of peace building is a lot. Actually, men can understand more that the causes and the effects of the violence towards women is also affecting himself and his family and the community. And in this research is also really clear by Dr. Gary Barker that men that has a trauma that get conflict resolution in a conflict and they don't get resolutions of peace building, they will be doing the conflict and the violence towards the households, towards the woman in the family. And also the idea of being men and being women is something that can be dialogue. It's not a dichotomy that laki-laki is in the public space and woman is domesticated. Because in the household, working in the household is as important as being in the public space. So the incentive is really seen that man is not only seen as someone who can only do violence. So when there's a battalion between the national military Indonesia, that the dialogue can reduce the violence happening in the villages. So when there's a gender equality, men can also benefit from this, because in this world it's not only women, there's men and vice versa. And this is my explanation. Thank you.
Move now to the interventions from the floor, and I'm privileged to be able to have with us our co-sponsor of this program, the United States Mission to the UN, and Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield has over 35 years experience in the diplomatic corps of the United States, and that included being ambassador to Liberia. When she arrived in Liberia, it was just coming out of 14 years of civil war. So she has experienced firsthand a lot of the issues that we're discussing and has been committed to the WPS agenda. So Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ambassador Bevere, and all of our colleagues here. I particularly want to thank my colleague from Japan and the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for co-hosting this important conversation. You know, for far too often, when I walk into a meeting like this, the vast majority of people around the room are men. And so I was really delighted when I walked into this room that this is not one of those types of meetings, but it really does happen sometime. I kind of looked around the room and I had to find the men at the table, except for my colleague here. But we really have to, we have to address this. We have to call it out. And sometimes when I walk in the room, I'll call it out. I'll ask, why are there not more women around the room? Where are the women on this issue? And I understand it will make people feel uncomfortable sometimes, but I think it's okay to be uncomfortable when you're being called out on things that are important. There's growth in discomfort because we need men and we need masculinity to step up and speak out, such as what Dr. Barker just did. We really need men as allies. Women should not always have to be the ones calling out gender imbalances. And too often, when discussing, Resolution 1325 and women, peace, and security, we don't focus on the role that men can play and should play as allies and as leaders, because many of them are sitting in the leadership seats. So if they're sitting in the leadership seats, we have to put the pressure on them to support these issues of women, peace, and security, and particularly with regard to peace processes and mitigating conflicts. We have to also support women leaders and coordinate peacekeeping efforts through a gendered lens. When I think about the period when I was in Liberia and seeing a woman president leading a country coming out of war and being surrounded by women, and the top leaders in the country was the president, me as the U.S. ambassador, the largest donor, and the SRSG, Ellen Loy, who really was a powerhouse there. And we called ourselves the female truckers because we were able to bring about change together in that country and confront men who still were in leadership positions there, who were still trying to do everything they could to bring down the women who were in that country. So again, we have to support women leaders, and we have to coordinate peacekeeping efforts through that gendered lens, as I stated. And historically, the gendered consequences of violence have not been included in the narrative of conflict, and that also is something that needs to change. Increasing women's engagement and participation in formal peace and security processes is not just better for women, it's better for everyone, for entire communities, for entire countries. And we have to address the fact that too many men often play what I would consider gatekeeping roles and fail to prioritize the meaningful participation of women and girls in peacemaking. And taking this on, we will have to, enhance decisions. We promote responsible stewardship and inform tailored efforts to minimize rather than perpetuate the inequalities that drive conflict and undermine peace. This is vital as a patriarchal gender norm, including violent masculinities, are a key driver of conflict instability. Again, using my experience in Liberia, and as I was listening to Gary speak, there were so many men in Liberia who were also victims, and they were victims of their own society, where men and boys at very young ages were forced into fighting. They were forced into using sexual violence against women. And I remember sitting in a room full of young boys who had been who'd been boy soldiers. And as I sat in the room with them, none of them had light in their eyes, not a single one of these boys. And everybody looked at them as bad people. I remember in one case, one young man, with one leg and one arm came to beg, and my driver said, "Oh, don't talk to him. He's a killer." And I looked at him and I said, "He's a victim." he too is a victim of this war. And we have to help these boys understand their victimization, but also help them understand how not to victimize others in the future. We have to take that on. I also recall being in Afghanistan and meeting with Afghan women and having those women say, I hear you on the education of our girls. It is so important that you educate our girls. But if you don't educate these boys, these girls will be stuck with uneducated men. They will have to marry uneducated men who will take their rights away from them, even though they're smarter than them. So we have to have a holistic approach. So I was really excited when I saw the title of this, Engaging Men as Allies in Women's Peace and Security. We have to work to ensure that we bring everyone around the table to ensure that we get a holistic approach to dealing with issues of gender. And this is a message I think we all have to carry. So we need to have the men at the table. Thank you, Ambassador. We need you as allies. We need you as advocates. So it is important that we all work together to fully live up to the promise of women, peace, and security, to live up to the promise of that agenda. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, and for your wisdom, as always, reaching deep into your experience and your commitment to these issues. So thank you so much. We're going to now have an intervention from the mission of the Philippines.
Thank you, Ambassador. We thank the missions of Japan and the United States and the Georgetown Institute for WPS, as well as the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for organizing this very excellent event. We also commend the authors and the researchers of the report that you distributed. Thank you for conducting the study, and particularly for including the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao in it. The Women, Peace, and Security agenda is a top priority for the Philippines. The establishment of BARM is a result of long and tedious peace negotiations that ended many decades of conflict in the area. The chief negotiator for the government was Dr. Miriam Coronel Ferrer, the first woman negotiator in the world to sign a peace accord with a major rebel group. We are currently finalizing the fourth generation of our national action plan called National Action Plan for Gender, Peace, and Security, not WPS, and it has an implementation of 10 years. The Bangsamoro Women Commission recently launched the Regional Action Plan for the area, and this is slated to be implemented until 2028, and it is expected to enhance the participation, the meaningful participation and leadership of women and girls in the BARM in conflict prevention, peace building, and governance. We welcome and appreciate the study and the information presented here today, as it adds to the body of knowledge that can inform our policymaking for a more effective and impactful formulation, monitoring, and implementation of our NAP GPS at the subnational and national levels. We agree that gender sensitization training should be mainstreamed in all peace-building programming and should be provided to male political leaders and decision makers. It is also important to illustrate the policy implications of using a masculinities lens. We need to engage men and boys as agents of change as part of a whole-of-society approach to preventing violence against women and expanding the space for women to participate and lead in peace efforts. We are concerned about the finding in the study that women's participation in the public sphere is not offset by reduction of their household responsibilities, thus causing some women to think that public participation is exhausting rather than empowering. And for this problem, we need men. We are encouraged by the finding that a majority of men interviewed in BARM believe that being violent does not add to their masculinity at all. The finding that men hope also for different expectations of masculinity for their children and for the next generation is likewise very encouraging for us. For there is hope for the eradication of toxic masculinities, and also hope for the expansion of the care agenda that would include men. So the Philippines thanks Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, and the researchers for the study. And we look forward to further studies on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now an intervention from Indonesia's mission.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I would like to also thank Georgetown Institute and Sasakawa Peace Foundation for the research. I would like to also welcome the remark of Ambassador Isi Kane and Ambassador Thomas Greenfield for the wonderful remark. So we are very proud to have Ms. Samsidar here. As probably we know, she knows very well WPS, even it's a thing. Even it was a thing in the United Nations, and we're very proud of that one. And the thing that she presents is the reason why we really understand the importance of bringing the agenda of WPS from the UN into the local level. So bringing it down to earth agenda, because many occasions we are talking about huge things in the UN, but it doesn't really translate well in the local level. And that's one of the two things that we would like to highlight in this meeting today. We're very happy with the research. It shows how it is impossible for us to translate WPS agenda to women on the ground and men on the ground, as well at the same time as their feedbacks and how we can learn the lesson from what they are seeing with regards to the agenda itself. We also really like and happy and glad to see that the research is being conducted, highlighting the contextuality of the situation at the local level. I'm really glad to listen to one of the presentation when it mentions that it's important to have the research contextualized with the local level so we can avoid unnecessary backlash in the involvement of men in the WPS agenda. So that encapsulates some of the elements that we keep on Indonesia keep on emphasizing when we are having open debate in the Security Council or even in many other fora on the importance of putting the different lenses of understanding of WPS, global level, regional level, national level, and context level, and the local level. So a bit of perspective based on the lesson that was highlighted by Ms. Samsidar in 2014. We at the highest political level, we already enacted presidential regulation on the protection of women and children in social conflict. And recently in 2022, it was translated into minister's regulation on guidelines to develop that at the local level. So that's one of the key takeaways that probably we can highlight a bit in this side event. Yes. The second point we'd like to highlight, it is also important, the research highlight the importance of promoting good stories on the WPS. Good stories in Aceh, Maluku, and probably in Bangsamoro can also be a good inspiration for the implementation of WPS agenda somewhere else. Of course, it comes with different contexts, but when women at the local level speaks from their heart on the issues of WPS, of course, it's gonna transpire and inspire the other women in other areas as well. Several good progress that we highlight and we are very proud to have and grateful to have is the changing mindset of the men on the issue of masculinity and different expectations that they have for their children in the future. It's something that we highlight very good. And then, of course, I think Ms. Samsidar was highlighting something very, very important on the importance of practice, daily practice. Practice makes perfect. So even in the household where women are engaged in dialogue with their husband, it's going to transpire into something bigger in the society level. So at the very least, when it's constantly being done, of course, it's going to make impact in the future. Our minister was here in the previous open debate for WPS, and she highlighted three things. First, she highlighted the importance of reigniting understanding on women participation. Second, she highlighted the importance of women's leadership. And the third one, she highlighted the importance of education on WPS. And then we think the research in itself and all of the presentation hit the notes on the importance of the three elements, especially the first and the last elements, where when reignite the understanding of women participation, it is very good to dig until very deep what kind of understanding we want on the women's participation and men's participation on the WPS. And then second one, of course, to keep educating people on the importance of men's participation in WPS. Of course, I don't want to be mansplaining too long, but that would be a key takeaway from me. And of course, we were also championing Resolution 2538 in Security Council on Women Peacekeepers Resolution. Based on their note, we're willing to work further and cooperate further with Georgetown Institute and Sasakawa Foundation for the future research ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have one final intervention before we close, and that's from Ukraine. Please look at your screen.
Hello to everyone. My name is Andriana Arerta. I am a servicewoman of Armed Forces of Ukraine since 2014. I am a leader of Ukrainian Women Veterans Movement. We were working also together with the government on second national action plan and on gender equality in military, in service, in society. So thank you for giving me a chance to speak. First of all, it's very hard to speak about women peace and security agenda now because we have a full-scale invasion and we have a hot, terrifying war in Ukraine. Almost all men are involved in military actions. They are mobilized to army, and now it's very hard to implement reforms even now, or to build stability in Ukraine. But what we can do and why men are not engaged in huge amount to women peace and security agenda. First of all, in Ukraine, it's because post-Soviet heritage, because education, and because that our enemy didn't give us a chance to implement reforms, to implement laws that will provide equal society. So now, what can we do? In Ukraine, I think, from my perspective, it's important now to give a power for men who are involved already, so to create for them environment for peer-to-peer support. Second, it's to engage media for women peace and security agenda. I think that storytelling and good story about successful story about men involved and engaged in women peace and security agenda will show society another role of women and men. The third one is I think that we must to implement reforms, and we must to strengthen our institutions, and we must put women peace and security agenda today on the table of justice. Thank you very much for your work, and we gain victory. We need to gain victory first. Women, men, the whole world must gain victory against terrorists now. Thank you.
And with those moving words, we come to the end of this program, but it's really, in many ways, the beginning of work that has to go on. So I want to thank everybody who came here. I especially want to thank our presenters. I want to thank Ambassador Shikana, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. Thank you, Samistar, for making the trip all the way from Aceh, and my colleagues at Georgetown. And, you know, they say it takes a village to make anything happen. Well, it took a village to make this happen. And I really want to thank the wonderful people at the Japanese mission particularly Mio Akita, and I want to thank Lana Kwan and our colleagues at the Institute. So thank you all, and please continue this work and your commitment.